They say the loudest guy in the room is the weakest, but in tech, he is the most dangerous. A 29-year-old executive called my life's work trash right before driving a healthcare platform off a digital cliff. He didn't realize I packed the only parachute 3 weeks earlier. Grab a drink. Let me tell you how I legally walked away with $25 million from the men who tried to bury me. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the budget needed to keep our channel alive. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, we would be incredibly grateful if you could support us with just $1, which will go directly to paying our dedicated staff so they can afford their living expenses and continue creating these revenge stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description and the pinned comment below. My name is Ivy Simmons. I am 38 years old, and I was the lead cybersecurity architect at PulseLogix. If you're not familiar with the name, PulseLogix was a massive, rapidly expanding electronic health record startup based in Austin, Texas. Our office was a typical tech bro paradise, complete with kombucha on tap, ping pong tables, and neon signs about changing the world. But behind the glass walls, we handled highly sensitive medical data for millions of patients. It was a serious operation, or at least it was supposed to be, until the board decided we needed fresh energy and brought in our new chief technology officer. His name was Bryce Sterling. Bryce was 29 years old, wore a terribly obvious fake Rolex, and suffered from a severe case of megalomania. He was the kind of guy who read a single biography of a famous tech billionaire and decided he was the second coming of Silicon Valley. Bryce did not actually know how to code anything complex. Instead, he communicated entirely in hollow buzzwords. Everything had to be disruptive, agile, and scalable. Worse still, he had a thinly veiled disdain for women in technical roles. To Bryce, I was not the architect who built the fortress keeping our company compliant with federal laws. I was just an aging roadblock in a cardigan who kept telling him no. The inevitable collision happened on a Tuesday, during our monthly all-hands meeting. Exactly 100 employees were packed into the main auditorium, with dozens more dialing in remotely. Bryce stood at the front of the room, pacing back and forth with a microphone like a motivational speaker. Behind him, a massive presentation slide displayed a poorly drawn diagram of our current server architecture, overlaid with a giant red cross. "We are moving too slowly," Bryce announced, his voice echoing off the acoustic panels. "We are supposed to be a tech unicorn, but our backend is moving like a dinosaur, and the main bottleneck are current security protocols." He pointed a laser pointer directly at the diagram representing the biometric encryption network. It was a system I had built from scratch, pouring thousands of hours of my life into ensuring it was utterly impenetrable. "This biometric encryption network is overly conservative, sluggish, and wildly expensive," Bryce declared, scanning the room to make sure everyone was watching him. "It is an outdated pile of trash that is actively holding back our scaling speed. We need to move fast and break things. We need cloud agility, not this paranoid, bunker mentality garbage." I felt my face grow hot, but I kept my voice perfectly level as I pressed the button on my desk microphone to interject. "Excuse me, Bryce," I said, the speakers carrying my voice across the room. "I need to clarify something. We are not running a food delivery app. We are storing oncology reports, psychiatric evaluations, and genetic testing results. If we move fast and break things with patient data, we are going to face catastrophic HIPAA violations. Any looseness in the encryption layers will lead to federal audits, massive fines, and potentially prison time for the executive team." Bryce stopped pacing. He looked at me, a condescending smirk spreading across his face. He tapped the control tablet on his podium. "Thank you for the history lesson, Ivy," he said smoothly, "but the future does not wait for compliance paranoia." I opened my mouth to respond, to explain the technical realities of what he was proposing, but no sound came out. I tapped my microphone. The green light was off. Bryce had manually cut my audio feed right in front of 100 of my peers. A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Some of the younger engineers snickered. I sat back in my chair, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached, and let him finish his delusional speech. The real retaliation came exactly 4 days later. I received a sudden calendar invite for a brief sync with Human Resources and Bryce. The meeting lasted exactly 7 minutes. Bryce informed me that, as part of his new agile restructuring, the role of lead cybersecurity architect was being sunsetted. Instead, he was graciously reassigning me to a newly created position, compliance document storage specialist. It was a blatant demotion. My salary remained the same, legally protecting them, but my administrative access was revoked. My engineering team was reassigned, and my new daily tasks consisted of sorting digital PDF files into archived folders. The strategy was painfully transparent. Bryce wanted to humiliate me until I quit in frustration, paving the way for him to replace my entire department with a cheap, outsourced coding team from overseas who would never dare question his genius. He expected tears. He expected shouting. He expected me to slam my badge on the table and storm out, giving him the easy victory he so desperately craved. Instead, I looked at him, gave a slow, cold smile, and nodded. "I accept the new role," I said quietly. Bryce looked momentarily confused, as if his script had been flipped, but his arrogance quickly smothered his doubt. He smugly welcomed me to the new team. What the 29-year-old visionary did not understand was that software is only as strong as the hardware authenticating it. He could take my title, and he could take my team, but he was entirely unaware that the system he was so eager to tear apart could not run a single line of code without the physical foundation I had laid. And I was more than happy to sit quietly in the dark, sorting documents, waiting for him to blindly pull the pin on his own grenade. Moving day arrived without fanfare. I packed my professional life into 2 standard brown cardboard boxes, acutely aware of the sympathetic, pitying glances from the junior analysts on the floor. I did not need their pity. I neatly stacked my reference books, my framed degree, and my coffee mug. Then, I knelt beneath my heavy oak desk and spun the dial on my personal steel safe. 34, 12, 68. The heavy door clicked open. I bypassed the emergency cache and the backup hard drives, reaching straight for the back to retrieve a simple manila envelope. Inside that envelope was a document dated October 9th, 2014. It was printed on cheap, flimsy paper from a time when Pulse Logics was nothing more than 4 exhausted people fueled by cheap ramen in a suffocatingly hot garage. Back then, they desperately needed an enterprise-grade security architecture, but had absolutely zero capital to build or buy one. I had brought them a solution, but I had also brought a contract drafted by a brilliant, paranoid law student I was dating at the time. I unfolded the pages, running my fingers over the faded ink. I flipped straight to page 6, section 4, paragraph B. The clause was beautifully unambiguous. It stated that Pulse Logics was granted an exclusive perpetual license to utilize the encryption software network. However, the proprietary hardware device generating the physical cryptographic keys remained my sole personal property. Furthermore, the contract explicitly dictated that if I were ever removed from a direct security management position, the licensing agreement remained intact, but I retained the absolute right to immediately repossess my physical hardware without prior notice. That piece of hardware had a name. I called it the Aegis Box. The Aegis Box was not a cloud-based application or a virtual machine. It was a tangible, heavy, matte black rectangular prism made of anodized aluminum, roughly the size of a standard dictionary. I had hand-soldered the internal motherboard during my final year of university. It housed a localized, air-gapped cryptographic generator that acted as the ultimate anchor of trust for the entire Pulse Logics database. Every single patient record, every encrypted file, every secure login pinged the Aegis box to verify its digital signature. The company executives believed our data floated securely in the invisible cloud, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire billion-dollar empire was anchored to a physical metal box sitting quietly on rack number 4 in our climate-controlled server room. With the contract safely tucked inside my leather tote bag, I took a casual stroll down the hallway toward the server room. My keycard still had access for another 48 hours before the IT department would officially process my demotion and downgrade my clearance. I swiped my badge, pushed open the heavy security door, and stepped into the freezing, roaring belly of the data center. Row upon row of servers blinked with rhythmic, hypnotic green and blue lights. I walked straight to rack number 4, knelt, and located the Aegis box nestled between 2 massive routing switches. It was humming softly, processing thousands of secure handshakes every single second. I did not hesitate. I reached around the back of the cold metal casing and pinched the plastic tab of the Ethernet cable. I pulled it out with a sharp click. Next, I yanked the main power cord. The green indicator light on the front of the box died instantly. I slipped the heavy device into my tote bag, right next to the legal contract, and calmly walked out of the room. No alarms blared, no sirens wailed. The PulseLogix network did not instantly crash. I had designed the system with an emergency failover protocol. When the network lost contact with the Aegis box, it automatically defaulted to a temporary memory cache, reusing the last batch of generated security tokens to keep operations running smoothly during what it assumed was a brief power outage or hardware reboot. The cache would hold the system together for a few weeks under normal operational loads, but it was running on fumes. The fortress still had its walls, but I had just walked out the front door with the only master key. Any major structural change to the database would immediately require a fresh cryptographic handshake, a handshake that was now physically sitting inside my purse. While I was carrying the heart of his company out to the parking lot, Bryce was sitting in his glass office, intensely focused on building his personal brand. I pulled out my phone and saw he had just published a massive, self-congratulatory post on LinkedIn. He was boasting to his network of sycophants about successfully trimming the fat from our department, claiming he was optimizing personnel costs by over 35%. He outlined his grand vision for the next quarter, which included a reckless, high-speed migration of all company data to a newly contracted, severely discounted cloud hosting provider. He was bragging about saving pennies while standing on a digital landmine. I drove home, poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, and opened my laptop to finalize my travel plans. If Bryce wanted to migrate tens of millions of medical records to a new server without the master authentication key, I definitely did not want to be anywhere near a computer when the entire database collapsed onto itself. I booked a one-way first-class ticket to a secluded ski resort tucked deep into the Rocky Mountains, situated at an elevation of 9,000 feet. The location was perfect for 2 very specific reasons. First, the scenery was absolutely breathtaking. Second, there was not a single cellular tower within a 50-mile radius. The cabin I rented was completely off the grid. The only way I could connect to the outside world was through a highly specialized, military-grade encrypted satellite uplink that I had personally configured and packed into my luggage. I was going to enjoy the snow, drink hot cocoa, and wait for the inevitable explosion. On Friday evening, while the rest of the corporate world was heading out for happy hour or going home to their families, Bryce was pacing the floor of the empty executive suite. He had officially initiated his grand data migration. He was coordinating the massive transfer with a newly hired engineering team located 12 time zones away. It was a bargain basement firm he had found on the internet, boasting unbelievably low hourly rates. Bryce had given them a completely unrealistic and punishing deadline. He demanded that all 75 terabytes of highly sensitive electronic health records be fully transitioned to the new, heavily discounted cloud hosting provider by Sunday night. He wanted to walk into the Monday morning board meeting and present himself as the absolute savior of the company, the man who drastically cut overhead and modernized a sluggish dinosaur overnight. At exactly 11:45 in the evening, the system pushed back. The lead contractor, a frantic-sounding man whose video feed kept freezing and lagging, unmuted his microphone. "Mr. Sterling, we are encountering a severe critical error," the contractor said, his voice laced with heavy panic. "The legacy encryption architecture is rejecting the mass export protocol. It is throwing a hard block, searching for a localized hardware authentication handshake. We cannot move the data intact." Bryce did not understand the technical reality of what he was hearing, but he absolutely hated the word cannot. "I do not pay you to read me error codes," Bryce snapped directly into his headset. "Override the authentication protocols. Force the export immediately. If those old security wrappers are creating friction, strip them off entirely. We are moving to a state-of-the-art cloud environment anyway. We do not need that paranoid, legacy garbage holding us back." The contractor hesitated for a long moment, warning that stripping the biometric keys could lead to severe data fragmentation and corruption, but Bryce immediately threatened to terminate their contract without pay if the job was not finished by morning. Terrified of losing the lucrative account, the offshore team complied. By 3 o'clock in the morning, they effectively ripped the data out of its heavily armored vault and dumped it into the new cheap servers completely unprotected. Bryce was so thrilled with his perceived authority and power that he actually popped a bottle of expensive champagne right there in the dark office, raising a glass to his own reflection in the window and loudly declaring himself a restructuring genius. However, the consequences of violently ripping away my cryptographic anchors did not take long to manifest. The system I built relied on those specific hardware keys to organize and securely associate the millions of different data points. Without them, the database turned into a chaotic, spinning blender. At exactly 4:15 on Sunday morning, the catastrophe began. A customer service representative working the lonely graveyard shift received a frantic phone call from a terrifyingly confused patient. A 62-year-old man in Ohio had logged into his patient portal and discovered a prescription for high-estrogen birth control pills listed under his active medications. 20 minutes later, a major surgical center in Seattle raised a Level 1 emergency ticket. They were preparing a patient for a complex organ transplant, but the digital chart had spontaneously altered the patient's blood type from O negative to AB positive because the data had lost its structural integrity. Patient histories were rapidly bleeding together. Severe peanut allergies were being mysteriously deleted. Psychiatric evaluations were attaching themselves to pediatric dental records, and highly confidential oncology reports were being displayed on the profiles of completely random strangers. When the automated emergency escalation emails began flooding Bryce's phone, any competent executive would have instantly engaged the emergency kill switch, shut down the external portals, and rolled back the servers to safety. But doing so would require Bryce to admit failure, delay his triumphant Monday presentation, and expose his catastrophic ignorance to the chief executive officer. So, he chose a much darker path. He logged into the central administrative dashboard and abused his executive privileges. He manually routed all incoming customer service error tickets into a hidden, unmonitored digital folder where no one could see them. Then, he drafted a company-wide automated alert to all client hospitals and clinics. "We are currently experiencing a temporary front-end display glitch due to our exciting new server upgrade," Bryce wrote. "Rest assured, patient data remains perfectly intact. Please disregard any visual anomalies." He was actively bearing a massive, life-threatening medical data corruption just to protect his own fragile ego. Thousands of miles away from that toxic office, the air was freezing and smelled strongly of pine sap and wood smoke. I was sitting outside my rented log cabin, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the sun slowly rise over the snow-capped mountain peaks. I poured myself a steaming cup of dark roast coffee from an old cast-iron percolator resting on the stone fire pit. On the wooden picnic table beside me sat a ruggedized, weatherproof tablet connected to my private, heavily encrypted satellite uplink. I was not actively hacking or monitoring the company servers. That would be a federal crime. Instead, I had simply set up a basic script to ping the public-facing status of my original security network. At exactly 6:30 in the morning, A tiny red terminal window popped open on my screen. The localized memory cache had officially destabilized. The encryption wrappers were confirmed completely dead. The heavy steel door protecting the PulseLogix database was no longer just unlocked. It had been blown completely off its hinges, leaving the most sensitive medical information in the country completely naked and exposed to the open internet. I took a slow, deep sip of my coffee, feeling the absolute peace of the mountain morning, and watched the digital fire burn. When Monday morning broke over the corporate headquarters, the bustling, arrogant energy of the startup died the second the first employee booted up their workstation. I was not physically present to hear the collective gasp, but the forensic audit logs and the hysterical testimonies I reviewed later painted a flawless picture of absolute devastation. At exactly 8:15 in the morning, the problem was no longer just about jumbled blood types or mismatched prescriptions. The minor database glitches from the weekend were merely the symptom of a much deadlier disease. Bryce had stripped away the encryption wrappers and left the doors wide open, and an opportunistic, highly organized ransomware syndicate had walked right through the front gate. Instead of the sleek, minimalist login portal, every single monitor in the 12-story building simultaneously snapped to a harsh, blinding crimson red. The fluorescent office lights seemed to dim as the glow from hundreds of hijacked screens illuminated the glass walls. In the center of the display was a crudely rendered, pixelated human skull. Beneath it, a block of stark white text delivered the death blow. Your entire network, including all patient medical histories, psychiatric evaluations, and surgical records, has been successfully encrypted by our syndicate. You have 48 hours to transfer $10 million in untraceable cryptocurrency to the provided wallet address. If you fail to pay, or if you attempt to contact federal authorities, we will dump the entirety of your unencrypted database onto the dark web for public download. Chaos erupted. The chief executive officer, a man who usually spent his mornings practicing his golf putt in his corner office, practically sprinted onto the engineering floor. His face was entirely drained of color. He understood the stakes with terrifying clarity. If tens of millions of highly classified medical records were leaked to the public, the company would not just face bankruptcy. The federal government would descend upon them with the full, crushing weight of the law. The executive board would face catastrophic personal liability, criminal negligence charges, and guaranteed federal prison sentences for gross violations of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. The company was staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, and the trigger was tied to a ticking clock. In the midst of this suffocating panic, Bryce Sterling made the single most arrogant and disastrous decision of his entire miserable career. A rational executive would have immediately locked down the building, brought in specialized cybersecurity negotiators, and confessed the weekend migration failure to the board. But Bryce was incapable of admitting fault. He knew that if the forensic investigators dug into the breach, they would immediately trace the vulnerability straight back to his direct orders to disable the security protocols. He would be ruined. So, he decided to play the invisible hero. He slipped away from the screaming executives, locked himself inside his private office, and closed the soundproof blinds. Using his supreme administrative privileges, Bryce quietly bypassed the standard dual authorization financial protocols. He accessed the company's emergency liquidity reserve, a rainy day fund strictly designated for catastrophic operational failures. With shaking hands, he initiated a massive wire transfer, routing exactly $10 million through a series of rapid automated crypto exchanges until it was converted into a completely untraceable blockchain ledger. He pasted the ransomware syndicate's digital wallet address into the destination field. He actually believed he was outsmarting everyone. He believed he could quietly pay the ransom, receive the decryption keys, silently unlock the servers, and then invent a brilliant cover story about a localized server outage that he personally resolved. He hit send. The $10 million vanished into the digital ether. For 10 agonizing minutes, Bryce sat in the dark, watching a little spinning loading wheel on his monitor. Finally, the crimson screen flickered. A new line of green text appeared beneath the pixelated skull. Payment received in full. Bryce let out a massive, shuddering breath, a sick smile of relief spreading across his face. He reached for his coffee mug, ready to download the decryption key and save his own skin. But criminals do not operate by corporate honor codes. A second line of text materialized on the screen, destroying his world completely. Thank you for the donation. Wiping server-side decryption keys now. Good luck. Before Bryce could even scream, the terminal window executed a rapid deletion script. The hackers took the $10 million and instantly vaporized the only mathematical key capable of unlocking the hijacked data. They had no intention of returning the files. The data was now permanently, irreversibly locked in a digital vault. The startup had just lost its entire war chest and its entire core product in one swift motion. The company was officially facing a death sentence. Total, paralyzing despair crashed over Bryce, but his survival instincts kicked in for one final, pathetic attempt. He remembered the legacy backups. Even if the live servers were locked by the hackers, the company maintained a highly secure, offline, cold storage backup of the entire database taken exactly 1 week prior. It was the ultimate fail-safe. He frantically opened the emergency command console and typed in the override commands to initiate a full system wipe and a complete restoration from the offline drives. He hit enter, praying to whatever tech gods would listen. The terminal paused. It attempted to unpack the heavily encrypted backup files. Then, a small, gray system dialog box popped up on the center of his screen. Critical error. Decryption protocol failed. Physical authentication required to unpack legacy archives. Please insert the Aegis box into the primary server rack to continue. Down in the freezing server room, the senior systems administrator practically tore the metal grating off rack number 4. The space where the Aegis box used to hum was completely empty, leaving behind nothing but a disconnected Ethernet cable dangling over the edge like a dead snake. The frantic realization triggered a massive, company-wide manhunt for the hardware. The director of human resources, his hands physically shaking over his keyboard, ran a keyword search through the digital security camera archives. He pulled up the high-definition footage from exactly 3 weeks prior. The entire executive board huddled around a single monitor in the control room and watched in horrifying silence as I calmly swiped my security badge, unplugged the black box, slipped it into my leather tote bag, and walked right out the front doors without breaking a single company protocol. A barrage of digital panic immediately followed. The chief executive officer, the head of the legal department, and Bryce Sterling simultaneously dialed my personal cell phone over and over again. All they received was the dead, hollow sound of an automated operator informing them that my number was temporarily unreachable. They sent dozens of urgent emails, practically begging, demanding, and threatening me to return to the office immediately. But I was sitting high in the Rocky Mountains, utterly untouchable and entirely off the grid. I waited until exactly 11 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to let them marinate in the absolute certainty of their own destruction. Once I felt the timing was perfect and the desperation had reached its absolute peak, I opened my satellite terminal and sent a single, heavily encrypted video conference link directly to the emergency distribution list of the executive boardroom. The connection established instantly. My screen populated with the frantic, terrified faces of the most powerful men at Pulse Logics. The chief executive officer looked as though he was actively having a massive coronary event, his tie completely undone and his face a sickly, ashen gray. Next to him, Bryce was sweating profusely. Dark, wet patches stained the underarms of his ridiculously expensive tailored shirt, and his eyes were wild with panic. The moment my face appeared on the giant projector screen in their boardroom, Bryce erupted like a cornered animal. "You stole company property," Bryce screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You committed corporate espionage. We have you on tape. I have the police on standby right now, and we are going to sue you into absolute oblivion. You are going to rot in a federal prison cell unless you bring that device back to this building right this exact second." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my ceramic coffee mug, letting the steam curl into the freezing mountain air. "Good morning, Bryce," I said, my voice projecting perfectly clear through the high-definition boardroom speakers. "And good morning to the rest of the board. Please tell the police to stand down immediately, because I have not stolen a single thing." With a few simple keystrokes on my ruggedized tablet, I shared my desktop screen directly to their projector. I opened the scanned, high-resolution digital file of the original Garage Days agreement. I scrolled down to page 6 and highlighted section 4, paragraph B, in bright, undeniable yellow. "As you can clearly read," I explained smoothly, "the Aegis box is my exclusive personal property. The company only holds a software license to use it. The contract explicitly dictates that upon my removal from a direct security management role, I maintain the absolute legal right to repossess my physical hardware immediately, without any prior notice. 3 weeks ago, Bryce graciously demoted me to a compliance document specialist. I was no longer managing security. Therefore, I simply packed up my personal belongings, including my framed university degree, my coffee mug, and my cryptography hardware. I am well within my legal rights. I was just following Bryce's brilliant restructuring plan." The company's general counsel, a terrifyingly sharp man who usually billed $1,000 an hour for his services, leaned uncomfortably close to the screen, adjusting his glasses to read the highlighted text. The color completely drained from his face. He swallowed hard, slowly turned his head to the chief executive officer, and gave a single, grim nod. The contract was legally bulletproof. "She is right," the lawyer whispered, loud enough for the sensitive table microphone to pick it up. "We have absolutely no legal claim to that machine." Bryce slammed his fists violently onto the mahogany conference table, his eyes completely unhinged. "She set a trap," Bryce roared, pointing a trembling finger at the camera lens. "This is a setup. She orchestrated this entire disaster just to extort us. She purposefully opened the door for those hackers to destroy my career." I set my coffee mug down on the wooden picnic table. I leaned directly into my webcam, dropping my polite smile and letting my expression harden into a mask of pure, absolute ice. "Do not project your catastrophic incompetence onto me, Bryce," I said sharply, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "I simply took my property and went on a ski vacation. The person who set a trap is the one who actively ordered a cheap offshore team to forcefully strip away the encryption wrappers this past weekend against all technical warnings. And the person who opened the door for those hackers is the exact same coward who secretly wired $10 million of the company's emergency liquidity fund to an untraceable offshore cryptocurrency wallet at 8:30 this morning in a pathetic, illegal attempt to cover his own tracks." A suffocating, deathly silence slammed into the boardroom. You could hear a pin drop. The chief executive officer slowly, mechanically rotated his head to look directly at his golden boy technology officer. Bryce's jaw dropped open. The remaining blood completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He tried to stammer out a defense, but his vocal cords failed him. His massive, unforgivable secret was laid bare in front of the entire company, the legal team, and the executive board, leaving him completely exposed with absolutely nowhere left to hide. I watched the chief executive officer slowly process the magnitude of the betrayal. He looked away from the monitor and turned his entire body toward his young, visionary executive. Bryce backed up against the glass wall of the boardroom, raising his hands in a pathetic, defensive gesture, stammering out incoherent excuses about protecting the company's stock price. I did not let the silence drag on. I tapped my microphone and took absolute control of the room. "Gentlemen, time is a luxury you no longer possess," I announced. "The offshore hackers have already deleted the live server keys. Your only hope is unpacking the offline cold storage backups, and as your system has politely informed you, that requires my physical property. I am perfectly willing to offer PulseLogix a one-time emergency hardware rental agreement so you can decrypt your backup drives and save your empire." The chief executive officer gripped the edge of the mahogany table. "How much, Ivy?" he croaked, his voice raw. $25 million, I stated, my tone as casual as if I were ordering a cup of coffee. Payable immediately via direct wire transfer to my private account. You have exactly 10 minutes to decide. Bryce lost whatever remained of his mind. He lunged toward the center of the table, his face purple with rage. Do not pay her a single dime, he screamed at the top of his lungs. It is blatant extortion. We can reverse engineer the cryptographic hash. We can build a new box, call the federal authorities, and have her arrested right now. The chief executive officer finally snapped. He reached across the table, grabbed the heavy desk phone, and smashed his thumb onto the security dispatch button. Get up here right now, he barked into the speaker. Less than 60 seconds later, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Two massive, broad-shouldered security guards stepped inside. Remove Mr. Sterling from this building immediately, the chief executive officer ordered, his voice dripping with pure venom. You are officially terminated. Bryce, if I ever see your face near this property again, I will personally ensure you are locked in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud. Bryce tried to fight back, kicking and shouting absolute nonsense about his legal rights and his equity shares, but the guards simply grabbed him by the arms and dragged him backward out of the room. His desperate screams echoed down the hallway until the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting him off completely. The era of the loud, arrogant tech visionary was officially over. The room fell dead silent again. The chief executive officer looked back at the projector screen. He was a ruthless businessman, but he was not an idiot. He calculated the odds perfectly. It was either $25 million today, or an absolute collapse of a billion-dollar company and guaranteed prison sentences for the entire executive board by tomorrow. He pulled his encrypted digital tablet toward him, opened the executive banking portal, and authorized the transfer. 15 minutes later, a sharp, clear chime echoed from my cell phone resting on the wooden picnic table. I glanced down at the screen. A notification from my offshore banking application confirmed that exactly $25 million had been successfully deposited and cleared into my private account. I gave a short, polite nod to the camera. Pleasure doing business with you. I reached into my bag, pulled out the heavy black aluminum Aegis box, and plugged it directly into the customized interface of my satellite terminal. I typed in my master administrative password. Within exactly 5 minutes, my screen flashed green. A secure, localized handshake was established across the encrypted satellite uplink, thousands of miles away in Austin. The frozen progress bar on the company's main terminal suddenly sprang to life. The offline backup files successfully unzipped. Patient records, medical histories, and surgical schedules flooded back into the secure database. Completely intact and heavily armored, the company was saved. The chief executive officer buried his face in his hands, letting out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He looked back up at the camera, his eyes pleading. Ivy, please, he begged. Fly back to Austin tomorrow. I am officially offering you the role of Chief Technology Officer. I will double your previous salary. I will give you whatever stock options you want. We need you. I smiled, a genuine, completely relaxed smile. I moved my mouse over to the video conference chat window and dragged a single document into the file sharing box. Check the chat, I said softly. That is my formal letter of resignation. Effective immediately. Good luck with the cloud migration. I ended the call and closed my laptop, leaving them staring at a blank screen. Today, I live in a beautiful, sprawling penthouse suite overlooking the Pacific coast. I run my own elite, boutique cybersecurity firm, taking on only the clients I choose to work with. My bank account is incredibly healthy, and I never have to listen to another lecture about moving fast and breaking things. As for Bryce, he is currently buried under a mountain of legal subpoenas. He is facing a massive investigation from the Securities and Exchange Commission for illegally embezzling company funds to pay a ransomware syndicate. His resume is entirely radioactive. No technology company in the world will even let him pass the lobby. It turns out that when the loud, empty talk finally stops, reality hits incredibly hard. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting our amazing team with just $1. You can quickly scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or click the PayPal link in the video description and the pinned comment. Your support directly pays the staff, helping them feed their families and continue bringing you the best revenge stories on the internet. Have a wonderful day, and remember to always keep your own master key.